all for waiting with us so patiently.
Yes, and being so patient. We'll do it short because in an hour's time I'm on my way to a bar mitzvah. And also you've been here a long time. I didn't think it would be from 4 to 6, but that's the way life is. Okay, we are lucky that Debbie Spiro, she made all the way from Carnation where she lives, since the common Aliyah 10 years ago.
30 years ago.
30? Oh, so what is that from 2000 and, from 86?
I'm working in Yad Vashem.
In Yad Vashem the last 10 years. That is where Gigit made the encounter, and that's why Gigit thought we would enjoy a little lecture from Debbie. Debbie has on both 7 kids here, and the 3 of them are Tzaporim, and Lianara, 6 out of 7 are married. So that's a nice thing to hear. And being here since 86, that's quite a few of us are a little shorter, some a little longer, some a little shorter, but that is very nice. Funny enough, came this through the door 2-3 days ago, and I said, they're going to talk Keitzat nifradim miyelet, aber immer veyelet. How do you separate? How do you say goodbye to each other? Father, mother, Kindertransport. Yad Vashem is inviting me. And I thought, this is mind-boggling. I'm here trying to set up a meeting for a lady who will give us that talk. So we have our private guide from Yad Vashem, and Kol HaKavod to Debbie. Thank you. Sorry for the mix-up.
It's actually not just coincidence, because the truth is that I will talk about it in a moment, but the Kindertransport was a direct result of the events of Kristallnacht. So that is why
this is an invite for commemorating the Kristallnacht and the programs they had in those days. And they are making an event in Yad Vashem. And that is, if I'm not wrong, also it's tomorrow.
Yeah,
That's November 9th. So this is very special. That we get it the day before. What do you call it? Preview. Yeah. Thank you very much, Debbie.
Okay, thank you. You know what? I'll try to stand for part of it because you can see from here, and then I'll work it out. Okay. The story of the Kindertransports is amongst the best known and most successful large-scale rescue efforts during the Shoah. It is the story of one nation that stood alone, opening its doors and its hearts to 10,000 of our children, at a time when the rest of the world stood by silently indifferent. It is a story of remarkable courage, first and foremost of the parents who saved their children by letting them go. It is the story of the courage of the many men and women, some of them, like Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld himself, who were only in their 20s at the time that this all took place, whose fierce determination to save these children compelled them to do everything in their power, and then some, to make these transports a reality. And finally, it is the story of the courage of the Kinder themselves, who agreed to leave their homes and families as they were sent literally into the arms of strangers. Perhaps the greatest courage of all is the courage these children exhibited when the war was finally over, and in the face of so much loss and devastation, they went on to build their lives alone, to create a new future for themselves and for our people. This is a sculpture done by the most famous Israeli sculptor by the name of Frank Meisler. He himself was a Kindertransport child. He left from Danzig when he was 10 years old. As he was getting on the train in Danzig, his father's last words to him were, "Make something of yourself. Go to university." When you are 10 years old, and that is what your father is saying to you when you're getting on a train, his message is loud and clear. I will never see you again. I will never have the opportunity to give you all the years of education and advice and assistance and love that I thought I would. So in this one last moment, this is my message. Make something of yourself. Go to university. Make something of yourself. Not that long afterwards, Frank Meisler's parents were both deported to Auschwitz, and he's the only survivor from his family. He's a man in his 90s. He still comes to work every single day, at his workshop in Old Yafo. Have any of you ever been there? Have you ever been to Old Yafo?
Yeah.
Have you been to his workshop?
Well, I've seen plenty of his work.
So if you go into his workshop in Old Yafo, if you come in the mornings, because by the afternoon he's already gone, he's there every single morning, still coming in to his workshop. And I'm sure that in his head, every morning when he gets up and he's tired, he says to himself, my father's last words, make something of yourself.
He's in Jerusalem.
No,
No,
in Old Yafo.
Oh, yeah.
In Old Yafo. He made 4 of these statues, and we'll see some of the other ones a little bit later on in the presentation. This is the one that stands in front of the train station in Berlin. The way that he has it, as you can see here, is that half of the children are looking forward to a new life, but they have their backs on the other children who are facing the other direction. Because from this exact same train station, not that long afterwards, so many other Jewish children left to their deaths in the East. Okay. Now, the film that can you go forward?
Yeah.
Just to enter? Okay. This film, actually there's a magnificent film, it is actually called Into the Arms of Strangers. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. Nope. You can, if you ever have the ability to watch it anywhere, we have a visual center in Yad Vashem, by the way, which is open from 9 in the morning to 5 at night every day, where all the films are available on computers for free. Any film you can imagine, a documentary, testimony, a Hollywood production. If you ever have the opportunity anywhere to see this film, Into the Arms of Strangers, it was done about the Kinder and the Kindertransport. It is probably the most moving Holocaust-related film that I have seen, because even though it encompasses so much sadness, it focuses on the life and the second chance of life that these children were given. The way that the film starts off, and this is just a very short clip, I don't know how much you'll be able to hear, but I'll try my best, is of the children playing in Germany, little Jewish children just playing in Germany before Hitler's rise to power. Children who were born like every other child, thinking that they would live happily ever after. Some children were rich, some children were poor, but every child grew up thinking, life is all ahead of me. The world is at my fingertips. Surrounded by my parents, my brothers, my sisters, my grandparents, could life get any better than this? Little did they know, literally, what evil was lurking in the shadows. November 9th to 10th, 1938, can you go forward? Just to enter.
Enter. Yeah.
November 9th to 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht. Pogroms were organized against all of the Jews of Germany and Austria. In one night's time, over 1,400 shuls were destroyed. Major architectural edifices. Telegrams had been sent out ahead of time to the head of every municipality across Germany and Austria, advising them that this pogrom is scheduled to take place, admonishing them that they were not to dare allow their police or fire departments to intervene. Their only job was to make sure that the damages would not spread to Aryan property. The next morning, for the Torah scrolls, of course, were taken out into the streets and desecrated. Jews who tried to salvage burning scrolls were shot on the spot. Every single Jewish storefront was smashed, hence the name Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. The next morning, for the first time ever, over 42,000 Jewish men were dragged out of their homes across Germany and Austria and shipped off to the German concentration camps of Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen, simply because they were Jews. After Kristallnacht, Jews the world over began to exert tremendous pressure on their governments. Please, please take in these German and Austrian Jews. Hitler clearly wants them out. No country in the world is taking them in. Please, please, take them into America, take them into Canada, take them into Australia, take them anywhere. But no country was interested in taking the Jews. Except, by the way, for the Dominican Republic, they offered to take in 10,000 Jews. Eventually, all fingers pointed to Great Britain. Why Great Britain? Because Great Britain had what no other country in the world had at the time, and that was the mandate to Palestine. Great Britain was given the mandate to oversee the creation, the first two-state solution started in the 1930s with Great Britain, even before that, in the 1920s. That was supposed to be Great Britain's job. But very quickly, the Jews realized that was not happening, and they had no interest in helping the Jews establish a state. Shortly before Kristallnacht, the British had just turned down a request to accept 10,000 Jewish children into Great Britain. into Palestine. And they said, absolutely not. Then along came Kristallnacht. Along came the pressure that was being exerted on them from all around the world. And I guess they were feeling a little bit embarrassed, and they said, well, we'll come up with a counteroffer. Instead, what we can do is we'll take in approximately 10,000 Jewish children into Great Britain. And they had a few stipulations. One stipulation was, when this crisis has passed, the war had not yet broken out, this is still November 38, all these children must be returned to their families in Germany and Austria. Of course, that never happened, because by the time the war was over 6.5 years later, none of these children had living parents in Germany and in Austria. Another stipulation was that only children through the age of 17 would be allowed in. Not a single adult at first was even allowed to accompany them on this journey. On November 15th, 1938, only a few days after Kristallnacht, Jewish British leaders appealed to Chamberlain, begging him to take in the Jewish children. And they came out with a statement already the following day. They had a very wonderful foreign minister at the time. His name was Samuel Hoare. And Samuel Hoare said, here is a chance of taking a young generation of a great people. Here is a chance of mitigating to some extent the terrible suffering of their parents and friends. Only 16 days later, that's pretty rapid fire action, the first Kindertransport left on the 1st of December 1938 from the station in Berlin, carrying 196 children to safety. About half of them had been living in a Jewish orphanage in Berlin that was destroyed in Kristallnacht. The very last transport left from Germany on September 1st, 1939, just as World War II began. And the last transport from Holland left for Britain on May 14th, 1940, the day of the Dutch surrender to Germany. Excuse me. Okay. We can go forward. Farewell. Not such a simple process. The children were not quite sure where they were. They had no idea where they were going. They had no idea why they were going. Parents tried desperately to shelter their child from the pain of knowing that we probably will never see each other again. And more than anything else, the parents just wanted the children to get on those trains. So they made promises that they could never keep. We will see you again in the summer. We will be coming to Britain and we will join you shortly. Some of the parents said things like, it is up to you to make sure that your sisters can get out also. Make sure, try to bring us in as well. What is a little child of 11 on his way to a foreign country? What is he supposed to do with that instruction? It is up to you to bring your sisters as well. When the war was finally over, the children who were left alive in England suffered tremendous, all the pangs of guilt that any survivor experienced were experienced all the more so by these children in Great Britain. Because each one knows that they had been single-handedly picked from amongst their entire families. It could be a family of 6 children, a family of 9 children. For whatever reason, they were the ones that were picked, that were sent on the trains to life. And the other children, as we saw in that statue, several months later, were sent off to death. By the way, this was a joint effort of Jews, Quakers, and Christians of many denominations to try to save these children. It was an incredible effort of the cream of the crop of humanity at a time when the rest of the world, I'm really sorry to say, did not pass the test. The British thought that if they could take in 10,000 children, then surely the Americans could take in 20,000 children. But as we'll soon see, that so did not happen. Where is your husband?
My husband
Is not here. So your husband was telling me that I believe it was you or somebody who came on that last ship from
Holland.
right, and it was called, what was it called? The name?
Kindertransport.
Okay, there was a woman by the name of Gertrude Weissmuller who lived in that town. She's recognized as one of the righteous amongst the nations in Yad Vashem. She was very involved in saving children on the Kindertransports. When she heard that Eichmann was not willing to let the children leave Vienna, she personally went to Vienna to argue with him until he finally agreed that the children could leave. on condition that the first train of 600 children would leave within 5 days, which happened, of course, to be Shabbat, on December the 12th, 1938. She was there fighting for the children at every single opportunity. All hoped that it would be a brief separation, but for most it was a final farewell. None could possibly have foreseen that in just another 2 years or so, again the trains would be departing from these very stations in the opposite direction, carrying the parents and the children left behind to their deaths in the East. Okay, you can go forward. When the trains went from Germany to the Hook of Holland, from the Hook of Holland they took a ferry across to Harwich in England. By the time the children arrived in Harwich, needless to say, they were incredibly exhausted. They were frightened. Each child was given a tag with a number. Those tags were given in England. And then a few days later, they were brought to the Liverpool Street Station in London. When they arrived at the Liverpool Street Station, hundreds of children at a time, the British, who had been advertising in the radios for days and days and days that these children were coming, would people please open these homes to these children. And by the way, the Jewish community in England had to put up a guarantee for every child that they were bringing in. They had to give for each child a £50 guarantee. That was a lot of money in those days, to guarantee the child's passage back to Germany when the crisis would have passed. In any event, the British came out in full force to pick and choose the child that they wanted. Little girls were by far the most popular. They were the easiest. I guess they were considered the most lovable, the easiest to take in. Little boys were second best. Teenagers, wasn't such a simple story. Some of the teenage boys and girls did end up in very good homes. Many of them, unfortunately, did not. Quite a number of them, the boys were taken advantage of as extra farm hands in British farms. The girls were made to work as maids. And many of the children simply just ended up in public, not housing, but like in a certain camp called Dovecroft that was converted to, I guess you could call it some kind of, originally it was a summer camp facility, and they made it into a kind of a residence for these children. And then once a week on Saturdays or Sundays, the British would come to go up and down the rows of Dovecourt to pick out the child that they wanted. For the children themselves, it was a very traumatic experience, because for the children who were picked, it was nice and a good feeling. But for those who were left behind, it was such a feeling of rejection. The children had to adapt to so many things. None of them spoke English. They weren't used to anything British. They weren't used to any British customs. They weren't used to any of the British food. A little boy wrote home to his parents, "They drink a strange liquid that looks like coffee. It tastes like poison, and they call it tea." Then on September 1st, 1939, war broke out, and once again the children were being shuffled around. They had finally a little bit acclimated over the last 10 months or so to their new homes, and when the war broke out, together with the British children, they were all sent out to the countryside, which is how both of my parents actually ended up in Shefford. Anybody here have relatives who were in Shefford? Solomon Schoenfeld?
I know
Shefford.
that my daughter-in-law's grandmother was the headmistress there, Dr. Bloomfeld.
That's your daughter-in-law's grandmother?
Yeah.
Who are your daughter-in-law's parents?
Anne and John Cohn.
Wow, that's incredible. That is really incredible. Wow. Yeah, a beautiful book was written recently. A book was written a long time ago by Judith Grunfeld, but a new book was written maybe 5 years ago or so about Shefford. It has beautifully written. My father must have read it 100 times. Okay, let's go forward. Okay. This is the first Kindertransport, which left on December 1st, 1938, and it arrived in England on the 2nd of December 1938. It created tremendous stir in Great Britain, a very positive excitement. This was an incredible thing that the British did. It was absolutely incredible. And these are the pictures that were in the newspapers at the time. This is a picture of when the boat, they first were arriving, that be, at the Hook of Holland. And this was a picture on the train. And actually, this lady here is my aunt. She was, she and two of her brothers were actually on the Kindertransport, the first transport from Leipzig. Maybe some of you know my aunt, Zesli Jakobowitz. She eventually moved to Montreal. She was married to my uncle George Jakobowitz. And so she's in this picture, and two of her brothers are in that picture. They were living in Leipzig, and the family went from Leipzig to Berlin to take the children on this journey. And it's okay, it happens to me all the time. My aunt's parents and her older brother left Leipzig. He was too old to go on the Kindertransport. Left Leipzig for Amsterdam on August 31st, about 9 months later, intending to spend Rosh Hashanah with my aunt's grandfather in Holland. War broke out the next day, and they never made it to England. They were stuck in Holland, and my aunt's mother eventually perished. In Berlin, parents were not allowed to accompany the children to the trains. The Germans did not want any uncomfortable, unpleasant scenes in public. They didn't want to see scenes of parents being forced apart from their children, of children crying, parents crying. The parents were only allowed to come so far, and then the rest of the way the children went on their own. What my aunt's mother did was the night before the train left, she checked out the route that the train would be taking from, as it was going to leave Berlin towards Holland, and she told her children the following. She said that she was watching, and that as the train would leave the station, it would cross a bridge. She told them that they should look out the window on the right-hand side, and she would stand below, waving goodbye and blessing them as the train passed overhead. 50 years later, my aunt wrote, "I see her yet today, smiling and waving. How well she knew that this was goodbye forever. It is etched in my heart. I'll forget it never." Okay, now, the next is a film. I hope, maybe, it'll be a little louder. You'll be able to hear at least part of it. Where'd my mouse go? Okay, can you? Okay, this is a picture of the, hey, I go back. No. You stay on the film. Okay, basically what you're seeing, the children, wait. Okay, the children were arriving in England. And when they got to England, customs was going through all of their bags. They were not allowed to bring in anything of value. They were only allowed to bring in literally a few small coins. They were given a very specific list of the clothing that they'd be allowed to bring in. Nothing at all of value. This little boy brought in a violin, a very expensive violin. And the British were thinking he's going to try to sell it on the black market and make a lot of money. And the British absolutely panicked. And they wanted to take away the violin. Now, this older man that you saw who was giving a speech, he was, I'll tell you afterwards, but let me just tell you what let me see if you can hear. No. Oof, okay. What he's doing, he had brought in this violin, and the British were furious, and they wanted to confiscate it. And this older man said, no, but he brought it in. He has no intention of selling it. He simply loves to play the violin. He's very talented. Please, he only brought it in for himself. And so the British, of course, didn't believe him, and they turned to this little boy, and they said, okay, if you brought it in, then I'm sure you're talented. Let's hear it. Play something. And so this little boy who had just arrived from Germany plays magnificently on his violin, God Save the King. And all of the people stopped in their tracks, all of the British, because how could you argue with that? This tiny little German refugee is coming in, he's maybe 5 years old, and that's what he's playing. And they finally let him bring in the violin. But I would also like to tell you a little bit about the man himself, the man who was speaking. You saw him previously, like an older man. Obviously, he's a survivor. His name was Norbert Wollheim. He was 25 years old, and he was a single man. And he was in the process of making plans for himself to escape Great Britain, and he got a phone call saying that these Kindertransports are going to start. Please, would he consider staying in Berlin just long enough to help the transports get started? And he right away agreed. He spent the next year or so helping along with the Kindertransports. Eventually, he even got permission to accompany the children on the journey on a condition that he didn't ever even get off the train in England. He had to go right back to Berlin. Shortly afterwards, by the time the Kindertransports were over and his work was finished, the war had broken out. He could no longer get out of Germany. He married and he had a child, and his wife and his child both perished in Auschwitz. And he survived, only because he stayed behind to help these children. And eventually he moved to Queens. He lived not far from where I was living in New York City. And he was just an extremely wonderful, wonderful man, and always his whole life so incredibly dedicated to the Jewish people.
They were remarried.
I think so. You got to know. Okay, can you go forward? Okay. So, this is a letter from Senator Taft. Senator Taft was a United States Senator who was represented the state of Ohio, where actually all my first 4 children were born. I lived in this exact town called Cleveland Heights, Ohio, after I was married for 8 years. And I'd like to tell you what this letter is all about. As I mentioned to you, after the British agreed that they would take in 10,000 Jewish children, they thought for sure America will agree to take in 20,000 Jewish children. And so, like everything else works in America, a bill had to be proposed and introduced to Congress, providing for the admission of these children. The bill died in committee, which meant it never even went anywhere, because the members very piously said it was contrary to the rules of God to take children away from their parents. So best to just leave them all to die with their parents in Germany, which is exactly what happened. And in this letter, a woman who I don't even believe was Jewish, her name was Mrs. Lewis Court, she wrote a letter to her state senator, Taft, begging her to please approve the bill to take in these Jewish children from Germany and Austria. And so this is what he writes back in his letter. This is his letter back to Mrs. Court. This is on June 7th, 1939, which is not even 3 months before the war began. I have not found it easy to decide what is the right thing to do with reference to this bill. The appeal for assistance to helpless children is hard to resist. The plan of admitting 20,000 children and separating them from their parents does not seem desirable to me. It inevitably suggests a reunion and a request for the admission of the children's families at a later time, which will be hard for any humane person to resist. I have tried to consider all the arguments that have been urged and to weigh them carefully, and have come to the conclusion that I shall vote against the bill. Sincerely yours, Robert A. Taft. He was true to his word. He voted against it. Okay, now, another film. This is really an incredibly...
Rabbi
I came in time.
Okay. Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld. Okay. So first I would like to start off by saying that I owe my life to this man, because on both sides, actually. Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld is the one who brought the Jacobovitz family into London. My mother was Jacobovitz, one of the 7 children, and he also provided for a Kindertransport visa for my father to be able to come from Vienna to London. I never met him, or maybe I must have met him when he was very little, because I know that when I was quite small, he came to stay with my father for a Shabbat in Queens. I don't ever remember meeting him. I always remember hearing about him. Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld was a household word name in our house. And my father always used to have one line. People always ask me if I'm related to Rabbi Solomon Schoenfeld, because my father's name is Fabi Schoenfeld. And I wasn't related, but I was closer than blood. This man was my father, this man was my brother, this man was my savior, this man was my friend, this man is responsible for everything good that ever happened in my life. When, what would have been his 100th birthday, which goes back, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so. 4 years, 5 years. Yad Vashem, there was a man by the name of Emanuel Fisher. Does anybody here know him? very wonderful man, who was supposed to be in the same Kindertransport as my father from Vienna to England. But he ended up on that transport, and my father actually ended up going to Paris instead. And he was the spearhead of that event, recognizing Rabbi Salomon Schoenfeld and the Kindertransports. And my father was the main speaker at the event. Interestingly, in Yad Vashem, the Kindertransport children were never considered to be survivors. They got out of Europe before the war broke out. How bad could their stories have been? It took many, many, many years for Yad Vashem to recognize the pain of these children, the anguish of these children, and the tremendous loss that each and every one of these children endured. But this event in February of 2012, actually, I believe, was the first time that the kinder of the Kindertransport were ever recognized by Yad Vashem. It was an incredibly powerful day. Kindertransport children came from all over Israel. Salomon Schoenfeld's son Jonathan, as I was telling you, flew in from London to be present at the occasion and to speak as well. After the war was over, his work did not stop. He went throughout Poland looking for Jewish children whom he could bring, not too many survived, but as many as there were, and to bring them back to live in safety in Great Britain. Did anybody know Isaac Schwartz? Yitzchak Schwartz? No? He grew up in London. He was one of the children who was brought after the war by Salomon Schoenfeld. Okay.
By the way, one thing on the hats, can you see that thing?
Oh.
Mention what that is on top.
Okay.
Oh, that's important.
So this was what he wore after the war.
Yeah.
When he was traveling all around post-war-torn Europe, he wanted to look official. He was trying to bring back Jewish children. That wasn't such a simple thing to pull off. And so he got permission. He made up his own uniform. He wasn't trying to impostor any British officer. He wasn't trying to pose as somebody that he wasn't, but he got permission from the British to make up his own uniform so that he would look like he was an official representative of the British government. I don't know details about the cap itself. Perhaps you can fill me in. But this was his uniform that strictly belonged to him. Nobody else had a uniform anything like it. And he wore this as he went around from DP camp to DP camp, or from town to town in Poland and Germany, trying to collect the fragments of Europe's Jewish children.
The thing he had on top was a Chanukiah.
Oh yeah?
And that's why we were called Hasmonean. Why were we called, the school was called Hasmonean? We were Chashmonaim.
Right, because of what he wore in his cap.
So he wore the hat, that hat he made up himself.
Oh my
it was all a
gosh.
fake. And he had that button on top of the hat. And that's
Oh my gosh.
Surely you remember that. Surely you remember the hat, the thing that he had, the wall, Hasmonean, he had the Chashmonaim.
Okay, now, the next film, you can just go forward, but don't start it yet.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, that's perfect, just take it. This was an interview with my father a number of years ago, talking about Salomon Schoenfeld and the work that he did. Maybe we'll be lucky, maybe this one will be a little louder and some of you will be able to hear it. Okay, you can let it start going. Oh, here, it has titles. Amid growing tension, Rabbi... One second. Oh, can you read the subtitles?
Yeah,
Yeah, you can read.
Okay. It was really his younger brother. Can you all read it?
Mm-hmm.
It came to them, to the school in Paris.
Wow.
Oh, Fred Worm.
Well, Fred Worms, exactly. Shit, you saw the name?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Shirley, who was Fred Worm's sister? Someone we know.
Oh, that's me.
That's me.
My sister kept her on the shoulder.
I was there.
Was Abigail's friend the daughter of Fabian Schoenfeld? Abigail's friend was the daughter of
What's that
Fabian
building?
Schoenfeld.
By the Debbie.
They made
What's
a-
that building?
I was in that picture.
You remember?
What is that building? Those are my parents.
Yeah, but that picture's a fake. That was not. It's not connected.
I know.
It's not connected.
I know that.
Yeah, yeah. But I was in that picture. Wow. I love that picture back. I'll show you. I want that picture. I have the picture.
Wow. One of these children might be.
Yeah.
You sure his friend?
Into? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm wondering, because, all of you
He
British?
just passed away, didn't he?
About
Yeah,
a
yeah.
year, last year, yeah, he's over 100 years old.
Recently.
Yeah.
Okay, because you're all British, are you all familiar with Nicholas Winton and the story?
Yeah.
Did you see?
Okay, so Nicholas Winton saved over 600 Jewish children from Czechoslovakia. He was a young stockbroker. He was living in London, and he got a phone call from a friend of his in Prague. It was Christmas, right before Christmas in 1938, and they were supposed to be meeting up for this skiing trip someplace in Europe. And he says, "So we're changing our plans." And he says, "Okay, what are the new plans?" He says, "Instead, you're coming to Prague." He said, "Prague? What am I going to do in Prague?" He said, "You're going to help me save Jewish children." And Nicholas Winton flew to Prague. He set up in his hotel room a table, and he started advertising that Jewish parents should come and register their children, and he will get them out of Czechoslovakia. He managed to save well over 669 Jewish children, actually. The last train was September 1st, 1939. The last train of children, 250 children, was sitting on the tracks in Czechoslovakia. When the word came that war broke out, the train was not allowed to travel. Not a single one of those children survived. He actually went back to, when war broke out, he went back to London. His friends stayed behind in Prague and continued to do whatever he could to try to help the Jewish children in Czechoslovakia. He never ever told anyone what he had done. Nobody ever knew. And he never told his wife. About 40 years later, his wife is up in the attic of their house, and she finds this very interesting looking scrapbook. There's a picture here of her husband holding a little child. There's all kinds of identity cards belonging to children, and she can't figure out, what is this? And she takes it downstairs, and she shows it to him, and he very reluctantly explains to her what he had done with those, and the story of how he had saved their children. And she was incredibly moved, and she felt that the story had to be known, not because she was looking for recognition for her husband, who so did not want recognition for himself, but because she felt that there was so much to learn from this story. That what her husband did as a young man in his 20s, Solomon Schoenfeld was also
Young
only in his
non-Jewish
20s.
man.
He was Jewish. He wasn't.
That's actually interesting. He was Jewish, but he was his parents had converted to Christianity, and he was brought up as a Christian. So by blood he was Jewish, although his upbringing was completely Christian. So that's an interesting comment. But Solomon Schoenfeld was also only in his 20s when he saved all of the children. What a young person can do to change the world, not the entire world. But our Chachamim have always said, he who saves a single life, it is as if he has saved the entire world. This man saved the lives of nearly 700 Jewish children.
700?
Have you seen
669.
that video? Did you see that video that they made?
They've made a few films about. Oh yes, I'm going to show it.
Show
I
that.
am
You've
going
got
to show
but we-
I am going to show it. I don't think we'll be able
The one
to
who
see
made
it.
it, we know her person, she did.
Okay. I don't know if this is the one you mean.
Remember?
Okay,
Yeah,
so you can do enter.
He saved, and then
You
everybody
can do
saved.
enter.
Enter.
Right.
You've got to see that film.
Okay, so this is Nicholas Winton with
Yeah.
one of the little Jewish children he had saved.
Again.
Okay, now,
Next.
yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
This
it.
woman here, Vera Giesing, was a little girl. She was not quite 11 years old. She was living in a small town outside of Prague. And she was sent by Nicholas Winton to Great Britain. She survived the war. Her parents, of course, did not. She survived the war. She was in Great Britain. Her parents, of course, did not. But like all of the children of the Kindertransport who felt compelled to almost to justify their survival, she went on to become a very great, well-known writer in Great Britain. And she once wrote the following: "Before I left on that last night, my parents gave me two wonderful gifts. One was a book of empty pages, beautiful leather-bound book. And Father said to me, I want you to use it as a diary. I want you to return to us with a diary full of what you did, what you thought when you were lonely, when you were homesick, so we can sit around the table and read it together. And Mother, she took me to an open window on that last night, and the sky was full of stars. And she said, let the stars of the night and the sun of the day be the messengers of our thoughts and our love. And in that way, we'll always be close. Through the sun and the stars and through my diary, I kept close to my parents and never felt abandoned. My foster father, when I asked him years later why he chose me to be a member of his family, he said, well, I knew I couldn't save the world. I knew I couldn't stop the war from starting, but I knew I could save one human life. And as Chamberlain broke his promise to Czechoslovakia and his Jews were in the greatest danger, I decided it must be a Czech Jewish child." Okay, now the following is another film about Nicholas, very, very short. Nicholas Winton. I don't know, again, if you'll be able to hear anything. Let's put it on and see. Maybe once we'll be lucky.
Yeah.
Back here is the list of all the children.
Oh, no, so here, 1 second. Let me help you.
And she
Yeah,
do
that's
Let me help you. Okay,
back.
do backspace.
Yeah.
Okay, and now click it again.
And now.
Okay, now put it on.
Yeah, this is the.
Back here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamond. Now, Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
You see it?
We don't need you to hold that.
And you will see
Okay. How many do
so
you have?
wonderful, so terribly, terribly touching.
So this gives a bit of sound.
No.
She asked if there's anyone in the audience who owes their life to Nicholas Winton. The name of the show in England, I think, is called That's Life. Wait, move away the hand. Move away.
He was on it on That's Life. On
Yeah.
That's Life.
No, this was a television program.
Television
In England.
program.
In England when they told the story. What's her name?
That's
the
his
lady?
wife.
What's her name? The lady who did this program.
This is your life.
No, it wasn't this. What's her name? What's her name? Do you know, Debbie, what her name is? Because I met her. She told me a story after this. You know, she told what she
Oh
said.
wait, let me watch this. Okay, now what was the story that she told you?
What's her name? Isn't it
I have
Vanessa
no-
Pels? Vanessa Pels, and she told me that Nicholas Winton, why he did it, because his parents had said the Jews, wherever they will be, they'll be in danger, and they had moved to England. So pretend you're not Jewish, and that way you might be. If anything happens to Jews, we'll all get away with it. And that's why he was brought up as a goy, because his parents really wanted him not to know and not to be in any danger. And he felt so guilty what his parents had done that pushed him even more.
That's interesting. That I did not know.
Yeah, and by the way, he wasn't the only one. You know, in England, how many families pretended not to be Jewish when they came?
Oh, yes, I know, I've taken a few of them through our museum.
Quite a few. They pretended not to be Jewish, but that was his family. They pretended not to be Jewish.
Okay, 1 second. Okay. You can go forward. I don't know what that 2008 is. What happens if you go forward? Okay. As you can see, on December 31st, 2002, Winston was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his services to humanity. Okay. Next. All right. Maybe you will be lucky and you'll be able to hear this film as well. Let me just tell you a little bit about it before we turn it on. There's a woman who's interviewed who's one of the Kindertransport children. Her name is Lori Kahn. She was one of 2 children living in Germany. Her older brother had already left to Great Britain. She was the younger of the 2. She was very much her father's darling, very, very much. And her parents had the opportunity to send her on the Kindertransport. As the day for the Kindertransport for her to leave was approaching, her father was really having a very difficult time. And as every day went by, he was getting really physically more and more increasingly ill. The day came to leave. She was on the train, and she was not leaving from Berlin. I forgot the city where she was from. And the trains, in that station, the Germans did let the parents go to the trains with the children, and the trains had very big picture windows. And she was standing by the window of the train, and her father was standing right on the other side holding her hand. And she says, "Papa, you have to let go of my hand. The train is going to leave soon." And he says, "1 more minute, 1 more minute, 1 more minute." And then she hears the whistle blowing, and she says, "Papa, Papa, let go of my hand. The train is going to leave soon." And he says, "Just 1 more minute, 1 more minute, 1 more minute." And she said, "I looked at him. I was afraid he was going to have a heart attack on the spot. He was getting whiter and whiter. And I just wanted that train to leave already." And then the train starts to gently roll. And I said, "Papa, Papa, let go of my hand. The train is leaving." And she said, "But he didn't let go of my hand. He pulled me out through the window." She didn't have another opportunity to go on another Kindertransport train. Her parents both perished. She had to endure 8 different camps before she survived. And she said every day of her life was a struggle within herself to forgive her father for pulling her out of that window.
Wow. What was her name?
Lori Kahn. Lori Kahn. Well, let's see if we
Where
can...
did Lori go to eventually? Where did she live?
I think she moved to America after. She stayed in England till after the war, and I think she eventually moved to the United States. Okay, you'll see a picture of her in a moment. You'll see her being interviewed. Okay, let's put it on. Oh, wait. Wait, stop it. Oh,
Stop it. How do you stop?
stop it, stop it, stop it. Let's both stop it.
Okay.
Okay, just do backspace.
Backspace.
Okay, now start it again.
I just have to have the hand in.
Okay. Okay, or here they're just showing you the children leaving from the station. Suitcases, that's her. Can you move the hand away? That's Lori and her father and her parents before the war. I don't know if you can hear anything. No, that's Lori Kahn. Okay, here she's talking about how she was waiting. That's not her, but that was the kind of a window where she was waiting. You see how they're holding hands? So that's how her father was holding her. He wouldn't let go. She's saying, "I'm seeing my father's face getting wider and wider." That's her father. She said, "He looks so terrible." And her mother was like going crazy. She was worried about the father and worried about the daughter who was leaving. He said, "That's the last way I remember her." And the man gives a signal for the train to start.
Is this from Spielberg's Evidence?
No, this is from Into the Arms of Strangers.
Okay.
He was saying that he just wanted to hold her hand a little bit longer and a little bit longer. He pulled me out through that window. Ay. Okay. Next. This is Frank Meisler, the sculptor from these famous sculptures. The first one he did, this is the one in Berlin, where half of the children are walking towards a new life, and their backs to the children who would go on to their deaths in the same station. These are the children as they arrived at the Liverpool Street Station in London. This is the sculpture there. Here you could see a little boy who also brought his violin. And these children arrive, they're completely alone in a foreign world, in a foreign country, and they're just anxiously looking towards a new life that they hope will be a good one. This was in his hometown of Danzig, at the train station in Danzig, where he last saw his parents. And this is his last one, which he did in the Hook of Holland, because the children went from Berlin to the Hook of Holland, and from the Hook of Holland they crossed the channel into Harwich. And Frank Meisler always says, all the sculptures that I've done in my life, I've done them with my hands, I've done them with my heart, but these I did with my kishkas.
In Berlin, I don't know if you've been to Berlin.
I'm going.
So when you stand in Berlin at an underground station, there's a sign there, you
Outside.
know where you're going,
Right
but then
there,
on the
yeah.
side it says you can hear
Right
from this
there.
station you can travel to Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau. Next is the whole list of destinations from this
Oh, you
station.
mean for real?
For real,
Yeah,
standing
till this day.
to this day. From
Sorry?
this station you can travel to Auschwitz.
Oh
You
my
see
God.
one after the other. It's
We were there in June.
would you see one after the other?
Excuse me, I just want to mention that Doris was on the Kindertransport,
Oh,
weren't you?
you came from where?
From Germany.
From where? Where? Which town? Which city?
A small place called Heise in Hessen.
And it was. And do you remember? How old are you when you left?
9.
9. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Did anyone else from your family leave with you? You're the only one. And did your parents survive?
But I came to relatives in England.
Oh, you went straight to relatives.
I went straight to relatives.
And did you, at the beginning, until the war broke out, were you able to communicate with your parents?
Yeah, even after the war.
Right, you were like, the Red Cross allowed
You
like
could
short
write
letters to
through
go
the
back
Red
and forth.
Cross. Yeah.
And then one day the letters stopped, right?
And when it's in November 42, I got a letter saying that they're going away and I'm not able to write. That's when there was ventilation after 2 years.
And did they die?
Till
Were they deported to Auschwitz?
1942, 44.
Were they deported to Auschwitz or they died in Theresienstadt?
Huh?
Was they deported to Auschwitz or did they perish?
No, they are from Theresienstadt in October 44
They were sent to Auschwitz.
to Auschwitz. Dus ze zouden niet ook in mijn vader overnaast een miljoen in. For circus they went there and
What was your maiden name? If you couldn't tell
What
me?
was your
What was your
maiden
maiden name?
Matthias.
You're a Matthias. You had family in Holland, didn't you?
Huh?
You had family in Holland. After the war, there was Matthias in Holland.
I had family in Holland, but not by the name Matthias.
There's a Matthias in Holland, we know them.
No.
Yeah.
Did you
Your
know
brothers and
somebody from
sisters?
Vienna with Miriam?
Excuse me.
Miriam.
Doris. Yeah.
You knew her?
Yeah. Doris, do you, Debbie asked, do you have brothers or
Did
sisters?
you have brothers and
Huh?
sisters?
Did you have brothers or
No.
sisters? I was an
She
only
knew
child.
Miriam.
And,
Miriam Wolf.
but you weren't sent to Shepherd, it was a Jewish
Huh?
school? You weren't sent to Shepherd, it was a Jewish school, the war broke out in England?
No.
She was too young.
No, she
Are
wasn't.
they
too
still
young.
in touch?
Yes,
She went to relatives.
She must have been 10 years old.
Yeah, they should have crossed the border.
Are you still in touch?
Were you taken in by a family?
I went to Kindertransport meetings.
Yes, she's a friend of yours.
Yeah?
Doris, did you have
She's
people?
a lawyer.
Doris, did your family in Holland get
What's
away?
your name?
The family of
Ask her if
She
her
doesn't
family
know.
got away. Doris, did your family in Holland get away?
Huh?
Your family in Holland, did they manage to escape?
They were in hiding in Holland.
What were they called?
After
What were they called, the ones in Holland?
Call her since she said you don't have to call me back, but now I've
But
Debbie,
did they survive?
you wanted to stop now?
Your family in Holland survived?
Debbie
What?
was interesting. She said
They
this for a
survived.
It's
They were
amazing.
in hiding during the war.
But they survived.
They were one of many. We know
sure.
that fact because the diary.
Excuse me.
People within in these lofts in Amsterdam, hundreds, and we just don't know the names.
Sorry, can we just let Debbie finish?
Doris
Because then,
Okay.
yes.
Guten
Whoops.
Guten Tag. Guten Tag.
Your last name is Guttentag?
Huh?
Your last name is Guttentag?
From where? From
Oh, I have a cousin who's married to a Guttentag. Ayala Turner is married to a Guttentag. They live here in Yerushalayim. No? Not related?
There is a family inside in Jerusalem.
from where?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What happened? Yes. Okay, never mind. I'll take over for her.
Yeah.
From where?
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what else is here. Okay, now, this is also, it's a film, unfortunately, that I don't guess you probably won't be able to hear. We'll try. It's a very wonderful man named Alexander Gordon. He was an orphan who was sent on the Kindertransport. When the Kindertransport children reached the age of 16 during the war, they were considered enemy aliens because they were all German and Austrian citizens. And so the British considered these Jewish children who came as refugees enemy aliens. Most of them were deported to Australia. Some of them were allowed to stay behind in England, but even those who stayed behind in England had very limited lives, were extremely restricted in their movements. He was one of the men, a young boy of 16, who was sent to Australia on this horrific ship. It was really a hell ship called the Dinur. The conditions were like how they described it. They brought the slaves over, the blacks over as slaves to the United States 100 or 200 years earlier. That's what it was like for these Jewish kids on the Dinur on the way to Australia. The ship was torpedoed because they thought it was an enemy ship. He survived everything. He stayed out the rest of the war in Australia. Eventually, when he was old enough, he came back to England and joined the British Armed Forces to fight the Nazis. And in this very short clip, he's with his granddaughter, and he's walking into Parliament in London, and he's showing her the sign that's hanging on the wall commemorating the children of the Kindertransport. And I don't know if you'll be able to hear, so I'm going to just have to tell you, he was saying, it's almost like he's reviewing his life, and he's saying all of the difficult things they'd experienced. And he said, and I always keep asking myself, why did I survive? There must be a reason why I survived. And he said, and I finally realized what that reason is. I survived so that I could bring more Jewish children into this world. I didn't survive for myself. I survived for my children and my grandchildren so that Jewish life and Jewish living could go on. It's incredibly powerful. Let's see if you can hear anything. That's his granddaughter. His name is Alexander Gordon. He was not one of the Buchenwald boys.
No.
He was in the Kindertransport. That's already when he was a British soldier. And here he's saying, I came to the conclusion it was for the children. Maybe you'll have an opportunity to see the film, and then you can hear all the things you didn't get to hear tonight. Okay. In 1989, somebody had asked me about Bertha Leverton. Who had asked me? Somebody? Bertha Leverton spearheaded a 50th anniversary union of the Kindertransports in London, with participants arriving with their family members from around the globe. They came to see and find old friends, to rejoice in their survival, to thank the people of Britain, to say Kaddish for the thousands of parents who with the strength of love had sent their children away to live, with the inner knowledge that they themselves might not. The majority of the Kinder had never seen their parents again. Prime Minister Thatcher wrote, "I am pleased and proud that the government of the time offered you refuge and help, following the dreadful persecution you suffered in Germany and Central Europe. You came to us as homeless children and grew up to enrich the life of this country with your courage and fortitude." 1.5 million Jewish children perished in the Holocaust. 10,000 precious young lives were miraculously spared through those who devoted their lives and energies to making these Kindertransports possible. These Kinder grew up to become productive members of society, always feeling driven to lead lives their parents would have been proud of. Many, like my father, became leading rabbis, Torah scholars, and teachers. 4 Kinder were Nobel Prize winners. Famous artists, physicians, professional athletes, politicians, illustrators, historians, authors, physicists, journalists, architects and sculptors, sociologists, entrepreneurs, lawyers, producers, and Israeli fighter pilots. Most of them married and had families of their own. Only when they themselves became parents could they begin to appreciate the enormity of their parents' sacrifice. Hakatan yihya le'elef v'atzair l'gayatzum. In the words of Yeshayahu, the little one shall become 1,000, and the young one a mighty nation.
Debbie, thank you very, very much. I'm sorry about all the technical.
Okay,
But
correct.
it just makes things more interesting, doesn't
More
it?
challenging for sure.
Martin, thank you for having us.
Can I just say one thing, if you don't mind? I'd like to say first of all thank you to Debbie very
Yes.
much for the thank you. I grew up with everybody that Debbie knows. Don't forget, I remember her father when I was this small coming to our house. I really do. It was a very close because he was involved with Polly Good and so was my father.
Yeah.
Kalman Kahana was we had mamish the same friends. And one thing, just after Mrs. Guttentag,
Doris.
Mrs. Doris,
Doris.
just one thing I'd like to tell you. Debbie said to you that people from Germany went through Holland. Well, in fact, there were camps in Holland where children from Germany were kept. And there was a lady called Frau Weissmuller. Does that name anything to you? Frau Weissmuller was a lady in Holland. Sure?
Yeah.
She's one of the righteous.
So what happened was Frau Weissmuller, come
It's
to
all
that
right.
later, well, you're not going to help it.
You're not going to find
no,
her.
Frau Weissmuller had a group of 160 children on the 10th of May 1940. They had gone already out of Germany and they got to Holland, and Holland they thought would be neutral in the Second World War like in the First. And those 160 children was 10th of May in Holland, and the Germans arrived. There was one boat sitting in a port called IJmuiden, and it was called the Bodegraven. And that boat took 160 children. They were told to run to get to the coast. My parents, my mother had left Leipzig, Berlin, and they got to Amsterdam. And they heard about this boat. Whoever heard about that boat, they took a bag. You couldn't go home, nothing. They just, from the middle of the street, they took cars and they got to IJmuiden and they got on the Bodegraven. So my mother, all her brothers, all her sisters, her parents, everybody, the entire family were on that last boat with all the Kindertransport, the whole lot. And I know to this day, we know families in London. You might know a family called Englander, Rosie Itzinger, the whole Englander family, they were on the boat. There were people who you had time to get nothing. My grandmother, and you could have, my mother wrote out the whole story for Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg wanted to make a story about it. Thank God we talked him out of it. Because that was the last ship that left Europe. We're talking not 39, we're talking 14th of May,
Yeah, the day,
1940.
that was the day that Holland was...
That Holland capitulated that day.
They
That
didn't
was the-
capitulate, they were conquered.
Conquer. Well, they capitulated. They gave
surrendered.
it. Yeah. So that was the last boat, and that boat had 160 Kindertransport from Frau Weissmuller. And you can't imagine this. We know the people today in London who have survived because of that boat. People they just left with nothing.
Really, Debbie, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for all of the delays and all of the...
Well, thank